Good afternoon, everybody. I was asked to speak about Hollywood images of the Second World War. I was told that I have 5 to 7 minutes to do so. Given the fact that Hollywood has made more than 1,000 movies about the war, including hundreds while the war was being fought, this struck me as an impossible task. So I decided to just focus on one little piece of the story, a piece that had serious ramifications for US-Soviet relations throughout the Cold War and continues to have serious meaning for US-Russian relations today. That is Hollywood's treatment of the atomic bombings of Japan, my area of expertise. But I discovered that even that would require hours. In fact, I've already spent 18 hours this semester with my students in my nuclear culture class talking about this topic. But so I decided to narrow it further and focus on Hollywood's first feature film about the atomic bombings, which was an MGM feature. It was made in 1946 and released in early 1947. It's now become an obscure film, but it was a very important film at the time that MGM thought was going to be the most important movie they had ever made, according to some of the studio executives. It's called The Beginning or the End. And it's important because as the first feature film, it's going to cement some of the bomb-related myths that are so crucial for the Cold War in the American mind. It actually was initially proposed by scientists at Oak Ridge who were concerned not only about the atomic bombings, but about the Cold War and the threat of war between the US and the Soviet Union. They wanted a film that was going to be very critical of the atomic bombings and the nuclear arms race. That was their initial intention. But as the film got going, their idea got sabotaged. Hollywood's rules at that point were that if you wanted to depict anybody who was actually alive at the time, they would have to get that person's written permission. Almost everybody, all the principal actors, the scientists, the politicians, the military people, they all gave permission. A couple didn't. Lisa Meitner and Niels Bohr didn't give permission. Einstein and others were reluctant, but they finally agreed. But it was the military people who were the main obstacle, and some of them insisted on getting paid to be depicted in the movie, and the main culprit was Leslie Groves. General Leslie Groves was the head of the Manhattan Project. According to Henry Wallace, Groves was an overt fascist. Groves also maintained control over America's nuclear arsenal after the war. Groves, who was the biggest defender of the atomic bombing, wrote a secret memo in December of 1945 in which he said, if it looks apparent that the Soviets are developing an atomic bomb, we should launch a preemptive attack, a nuclear attack against them, and destroy their bomb-making ability. So this is the man who's not only going to be paid to be portrayed, he's going to demand veto power over the script, which he gets. And so that's why the final product is so not only disappointing, it's a complete lie from beginning to end. So I want to talk about the myths that the film perpetuates. First, we have Franklin Roosevelt saying to his secretary, this is in April of 1945, right before his death. He says, the Japanese are fanatics who, quote, will fight right down to the women and children rather than surrender. American intelligence had been saying the opposite, that the Japanese knew if they were defeated, they would surrender. Then Roosevelt worries right before his death in April of 45 about Hitler getting an atomic bomb. The US had known since late 1944 that the Germans were not developing the bomb, that they abandoned their bomb project in 1942 to work on V-1 and V-2 rockets. So again, another lie. Then we have Roosevelt saying that he's going to tell Vice President Truman, is going to bring him in, tell him the secret of the bomb project. One of the amazing things about the war is that Truman, who was in vice president for 82 days before Roosevelt died, was never informed that the United States was building an atomic bomb. Nobody had enough respect for Truman to even let him in on the fact that we were building an atomic bomb till after Roosevelt died. Roosevelt never had any intention of telling Truman. So FDR dies and Truman takes over. And Truman now says to his press secretary, Charlie Ross, says that the bomb will save a year of war. And I quote him, he says, "A year less war will mean life for 300,000, maybe 500,000 of America's finest youth. Not only that, but it will mean life for thousands of British, of Russians, of Chinese, of Japanese men. These were the decisive considerations in my consent." And his press aide, Charlie Ross, says, well, of course, you had no choice but to develop and drop the atomic bomb. In real life, Truman knew the bomb wasn't necessary. He said he went to Potsdam to make sure that the Russians were coming in. He has lunch with Stalin on July 17th. He writes in his journal afterwards, Stalin will be in the Jap war by August 15th. Finny Japs when that occurs. He writes home to his wife Bess the next day. The Russians are coming in. We'll end the war a year sooner now. Think of all the kids who won't be killed. That's where the year savings come in, by the Soviet entry into the war, not by dropping the atomic bomb. Truman knew there were two ways to get the Japanese to surrender without the Soviet invasion or without American invasion and without dropping an atomic bomb. That was, number one, to change the surrender terms, let the Japanese know they could keep the emperor. Number two, to warn the Japanese that the Soviets are about to come in or wait for the Soviet invasion to begin. But Truman wanted to use the atomic bomb. So then they have a scene after that where the plane, the Enola Gay, is getting ready to drop the bomb on Hiroshima, and the co-pilot looks down and he says, we've been dropping warning leaflets on them for about 10 days now. That's 10 days more warning than they gave us at Pearl Harbor. In reality, the United States dropped no warning leaflets about the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. Then it prepared leaflets about the bomb to warn Nagasaki. When we dropped the bomb on August 9th, we dropped the leaflets on August 10th. So we weren't showering them with leaflets for 10 days. It's a myth that makes us look like good guys, but that was not the truth at all. There were two fictional characters in the film, two main ones, and one is the protagonist, Matt Cochran. He's a young, handsome physicist who just got married, and his newlywed wife is back in the States. He doesn't know, or he does actually know she's pregnant, but his wife doesn't know that he knows that she's pregnant. And he was the one who kept, throughout the movie, voicing the biggest concerns about building an atomic bomb or using an atomic bomb. And when he's arming the device, he's arming the bomb at Tinian, the nuclear reaction begins prematurely. And so in order to avoid a detonation that's going to blow up the island of Tinian, he reaches his hand in and sacrifices himself in order to stop the nuclear reaction. So he gets a lethal dose of radiation. He knows he's about to die. And he says, his last words are, maybe that's what I get for helping to build this thing. But before he dies, in typical Hollywood fashion, he writes a letter to his wife. And his friend, Jeff Nixon, the other fictional character, brings the letter back to Matt's young pregnant wife. And they start reading it together in front of the Lincoln Memorial, of course, where the scene, the site where most great Hollywood movies have their important scenes. And so she starts reading it out loud, and it says, this is Matt's last words to her. He says, from the first, I had my doubts whether man could ever learn to use this terrifying force for good instead of evil. The dark threats of future atomic war, which could destroy civilization unless men learn to live together. But Matt, in his dying moments, had an epiphany. And even though he was so opposed to the bomb, now he realizes, and he actually appears on screen. They brought him back from the dead. They resuscitated him so that he can speak the final words of wisdom. And he says, God has not shown us a new way to destroy ourselves. Atomic energy is the hand he has extended to us to lift us from the ruins of war and lighten the burdens of peace. He explains that atomic power will not be man's doom. It'll provide a new Garden of Eden and unlimited abundance. And he says, for this is the timeless moment that gives us all a chance to prove that human beings are made in the image and likeness of God. And so nuclear weapons are not the scourge of mankind, they're the savior of mankind. And that becomes the message that the United States is going to give when in all of our official justifications for dropping an atomic bomb, that the Soviets knew better than anybody was not necessary to end the war. Physicist Leo Szilard, who had strongly opposed use of the bomb and tried to mobilize the scientists to get Truman to stop the project, to stop the use of the bomb against Japan, and then fought for nuclear abolition afterwards, attended a special preview of the movie for the scientists. And he was disgusted by the pro-bomb propaganda. And he commented, he says, if our sin as scientists was to make and use the atomic bomb, then our punishment was to watch the movie, the beginning or the end. I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.